The Israelites journeyed through the wilderness. It was a vast, arid expanse, stretching endlessly before them. The sun beat down mercilessly and the sand seemed to stretch on forever. Each step was a struggle, each breath a labor. The wilderness was not just a physical challenge, but a test of their faith and endurance. They had escaped slavery in Egypt. The memories of their bondage were still fresh in their minds. They remembered the harsh whips of their taskmasters, the grueling labor and the endless days of toil. Yet despite the hardships, Egypt had been a place of familiarity, a place where they knew what to expect. God was leading them to the promised land, a land flowing with milk and honey, a place of abundance and peace. He guided them with a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. His presence was a constant reminder of his promise and his protection. But the journey was hard. The people grew tired and hungry. The desert was unforgiving and their supplies dwindled. Their bodies ached and their spirits waned. The initial excitement of freedom began to fade, replaced by the harsh reality of their circumstances. They began to complain. They longed for the food they had in Egypt. The leeks, the onions, the garlic and the cucumbers. They remembered the taste of the food, the satisfaction of a full belly. Their present hunger made the past seem more appealing, and they began to grumble. They forgot about God's miracles. They forgot about his deliverance, the parting of the Red Sea, the plagues that had struck Egypt, the manna that fell from heaven. In their discomfort, they lost sight of the wonders they had witnessed, the divine interventions that had saved them. The people grumbled against Moses. They blamed him for their troubles. "Why did you bring us out here to die?" they demanded. Their anger and frustration were directed at their leader, the one who had guided them out of bondage. They wished they had stayed in Egypt. "Why did you bring us out here to die?" they cried. The fear of the unknown, the uncertainty of their journey, made them yearn for the familiarity of their past, even if it was a past of suffering. At least in Egypt we had food to eat. Their complaints echoed through the camp. The murmurs of discontent spread like wildfire, infecting the hearts and minds of the people. The sense of community began to fray as individual needs and desires took precedence. They had forgotten the bitterness of slavery. They only remembered the taste of onions and cucumbers. The human mind has a way of romanticizing the past, of glossing over the pain and highlighting the pleasures. In their hunger, the Israelites' memories became selective. Their hearts were filled with discontent. They had lost sight of God's blessings. The manna that fell from heaven, the water that sprang from the rock, the protection from enemies. All these miracles were overshadowed by their immediate discomfort. They focused only on their present discomfort. Their complaints revealed a deeper problem, a lack of trust, a lack of faith. They were so consumed by their physical needs that they forgot the spiritual journey they were on. They lacked faith in God's provision. They doubted his love and care for them. Despite all the signs and wonders, despite the constant presence of God, their faith wavered. The desert was not just a physical trial, but a spiritual one, testing the very core of their belief. Moses heard their complaints. The people were restless, their voices rising in a cacophony of dissatisfaction. They were hungry, thirsty, and tired of wandering in the desert. Their grievances were not just about their physical discomforts, but also about their uncertainty and fear of the unknown. They questioned Moses' leadership and doubted the promises that had been made to them. The weight of their discontent was palpable, and Moses felt it deeply. He was weary from the journey. The endless expanse of the desert stretched out before him, a harsh and unforgiving landscape. Each step was a struggle, and the relentless sun beat down on him, sapping his strength. The physical toll of the journey was immense, but it was the emotional and spiritual burden that weighed heaviest on his heart. He felt the pressure of leading a nation, the responsibility of guiding them to a promised land that seemed ever elusive. He was burdened by their lack of faith. He was also angry. The people's constant complaints and doubts gnawed at him. They had witnessed miracles, yet their faith wavered at every challenge. Moses felt a deep frustration, a sense of betrayal even. He had sacrificed so much, yet they questioned his every decision. His anger was not just at the people, but also at the situation, at the seemingly insurmountable obstacles that lay in their path. They were not just complaining about him. Their grievances went beyond personal attacks. They were questioning the very foundation of their journey, the divine promise that had led them out of Egypt. Their arguments were filled with fear and doubt, and their unity was fracturing. The community that had once been bound by a shared vision was now splintering under the weight of their collective anxiety. They were complaining about God. Their dissatisfaction was not just with Moses, but with the divine plan itself. They questioned why they had been led into the desert, why they were suffering, and whether the promises of a better future were real. Their faith was being tested, and many were failing that test. The spiritual crisis was as severe as the physical hardships they faced. It was too much for him to bear alone. The isolation of leadership weighed heavily on Moses. He felt the crushing responsibility of guiding a nation, the loneliness of being the one to make the hard decisions. The burden of their collective fears and doubts was overwhelming. He felt isolated, despite being surrounded by people. The solitude of leadership was a heavy cloak that he wore, and it was suffocating. Moses cried out to God. In his desperation, he turned to the only source of strength he knew. His prayers were filled with anguish and a deep sense of inadequacy. He poured out his heart, expressing his fears, his frustrations, and his sense of helplessness. He sought divine intervention, a sign, a solution to the overwhelming burden he carried. "Why have you treated your servant so harshly?" he pleaded. His voice was filled with pain and confusion. He could not understand why he had been chosen for such a heavy burden, why he had to face such immense challenges. His plea was a raw and honest expression of his inner turmoil. He felt abandoned, left to navigate an impossible path without sufficient guidance or support. "I cannot carry all these people by myself. The burden is too heavy for me." The weight of the people's needs, their fears, and their expectations was crushing. Moses felt physically and emotionally exhausted. He recognized his limitations, his inability to meet the demands placed upon him. The burden of leadership was too great for one man to bear alone. "If this is how you are going to treat me, please go ahead and kill me." His desperation reached a peak. He would rather die than continue under such unbearable pressure. His cry was a testament to the depth of his despair, a plea for release from the overwhelming burden. He felt trapped, with no way out but divine intervention. "Do not let me see my wretchedness anymore." Moses was at his breaking point. He could no longer bear to see his own failures, his own inadequacies. The weight of his perceived shortcomings was too much to bear. He sought an end to his suffering, a release from the relentless pressure of leadership. Moses felt alone and overwhelmed. The vastness of the desert mirrored the emptiness he felt inside. He was surrounded by people, yet he felt utterly alone. The burden of leadership had isolated him, leaving him to grapple with his fears and doubts in solitude. The weight of his responsibilities was a constant, crushing presence. He poured out his heart to God. In his darkest moments, he sought solace in prayer. He laid bare his soul, expressing his deepest fears and his most profound hopes. His prayers were a lifeline, a connection to God's power that he desperately needed. He sought guidance, strength, and a way forward. He confessed his inability to lead the people on his own. He needed God's help. Moses acknowledged his limitations, his need for divine assistance. He could not carry the burden alone. His confession was an act of humility, a recognition that true leadership requires more than human strength. It requires faith, support, and the guidance of a higher power. God heard Moses' cry. He understood his servant's burden. He knew that Moses couldn't lead the people alone. God had a plan. He would share the responsibility. God told Moses, "Gather for me 70 elders from the Israelites. Bring them to the tent of meeting. Have them stand there with you." The 70 elders would help Moses lead the people. They would share the burden of leadership. This would lighten Moses' load. It would also benefit the elders. They would grow in their faith. They would learn to lead with wisdom and compassion. God showed his power to the elders. He took some of the spirit that was on Moses. He put it on the 70 elders. The Spirit enabled them to prophesy. They spoke words of encouragement and guidance to the people. But God also showed his displeasure with the people's complaints. He sent a wind that brought quail from the sea. They covered the camp. The people ate quail for a whole month. But their greed had consequences. While the meat was still in their mouths, God's anger burned against them. He struck them with a severe plague. The poison of discontent. The Israelites' story is a warning. It shows the danger of discontent. When we focus on what we lack, we forget God's blessings. We become blind to his provision. Our hearts grow cold and hard. We begin to doubt God's goodness. Discontent is like a poison. It slowly destroys us from the inside out. It robs us of our joy, peace, and gratitude. It damages our relationships with God and others. Remembering yesterday, the Israelites longed for the food of Egypt. They forgot the pain of slavery. They romanticized the past. They failed to appreciate their present freedom. They had selective memories. This is a common human experience. We often look back on the past with rose-colored glasses. We remember the good times. We forget the bad. This can lead to dissatisfaction with our present circumstances. It can prevent us from moving forward in faith. The true bread of life. The Israelites craved physical food. They failed to hunger for spiritual nourishment. They forgot that God provided manna in the wilderness. They didn't understand that he was the true source of their sustenance. Jesus taught that he is the bread of life. He offers us spiritual nourishment that satisfies our deepest hunger. When we focus on our physical needs, we neglect our spiritual needs. We become malnourished in our souls. We lose sight of what truly matters. A lesson for today. The story of the Israelites is a timeless lesson. It teaches us about the importance of gratitude, faith, and contentment. These virtues are essential for a fulfilling life. They are also crucial for our relationship with God. Gratitude helps us to appreciate God's blessings. It shifts our focus from what we lack to what we have. Faith enables us to trust in God's provision, even when we don't understand his ways. Contentment brings peace and satisfaction in the midst of difficult circumstances. Gratitude and the journey ahead. The Israelites' journey through the wilderness is a metaphor for our own lives. Just as they faced the harsh realities of the desert, we too encounter our own deserts, times of difficulty, uncertainty, and struggle. These moments test our faith and resilience. We all face challenges and uncertainties. Life is full of unexpected twists and turns, and sometimes the path ahead seems daunting. Whether it's a personal crisis, a professional setback, or a global event, these challenges can leave us feeling lost and overwhelmed. We may be tempted to complain and grumble. It's easy to focus on what's going wrong and to let frustration take over. We might find ourselves questioning why things are happening to us and feeling a sense of injustice or unfairness. We may be tempted to look back on the past with longing. Nostalgia can be a powerful emotion, making us yearn for what once was. We might idealize the past, forgetting the challenges we faced back then, and wishing we could return to those seemingly simpler times. But we must remember that God is with us. In our darkest moments, when the journey seems impossible, we are not alone. God's presence is a constant source of strength and comfort, guiding us through the wilderness. He will provide for our needs. Just as he provided manna and water for the Israelites, he will provide for us in our times of need. It may not always be in the way we expect, but his provision is always timely and sufficient. Let us learn from the Israelites' mistakes. Their journey was marked by moments of doubt and disobedience, but also by incredible acts of faith and trust. We can choose to follow their example of faith rather than their moments of faltering. Let us cultivate hearts of gratitude, faith, and contentment. Gratitude shifts our focus from what we lack to what we have. Faith reminds us that we are part of a bigger plan, and contentment allows us to find peace in the present moment. This is the path to true freedom and joy. When we embrace gratitude, faith, and contentment, we free ourselves from the chains of worry and fear. We find joy in the journey, no matter how challenging it may be. This is how we honor God in our journey through the wilderness of life. By trusting in his provision, learning from the past, and cultivating a heart of gratitude, we walk the path he has set before us with confidence and hope.